Hello everyone, this is a video presentation on the topic of language as social practice, which I think is a very interesting and important topic. In this presentation, I have selected an article called Language as Social Practice, Deconstructing Boundaries in Intercultural Bilingual Education by Virginia Zavala 2018. I have chosen this article for this presentation because the title really arouses my interest. As soon as I saw the title of the article, I was so curious about how boundaries will be deconstructing bilingual education. So this is the content of this presentation. I will start with some perspectives about language as social practice. Then I will talk about the aim of the research study, the methodology, the findings, the strengths and limitations of the study. After that, some pedagogical implications will be made. Eventually, this presentation will be ended by some critical questions. To learn a language, we do not only study language or language forms, but rather language practices in interrelationship to the social, historical, political, and economic conditions that produce them, based on Gesha et al. 2017, page number 5. Language is more than a mode of communication or a system composed of rules, vocabulary, and meaning. It is an active medium of social practice through which people construct, define, and struggle over meanings in dialogue with and in relation to others, based on Walsh 1991, page 32. So instead of assuming languages as complete and bounded entities that are distributed in society according to different contexts, Zavala conceptualized them as resources of social practice that speakers use in an agentive way in order to deal with what they do in the world. If we follow this approach, bilingualism would no longer be understood as a cognitive system with two linguistic compartments, but as dynamic and fluid practices that people engage with in order to produce meaning and communicate in diverse contexts of their lives. This is based on Kanagaraja 2013, Gasha 2009, and Heckler 2007. The aim of the study is to discuss the way some of the ideologies and practices related to language are reproduced, which implements the national policy of social inclusion for Quechua speaking youth from vulnerable contexts. The study was also conducted to address how multiple and competing language ideologies about Quechua are simultaneously at work in relation to different conceptualizations of language, language boundaries, and speaker. The study was conducted at the Pre-Service Teacher Education Program in Intercultural Bilingual Education (IBE) in the city of Lima in Peru. The participants are the students who position themselves as speakers of Quechua in urban, global, mobile, and transnational contexts. They are speakers of Quechua but also of Spanish. They are traditional but also contemporary. They are rural but also urban. They are local but also global. They are indigenous but at the same time they are not. To make sure the data received is reliable, some methodologies are used, such as number 1, classroom observation during 2 semesters of 2 Spanish and 2 Quechua courses. Number 2, document analysis, multiple interviews with 6 focus students from different clusters, 8 focus groups with other 50 students. Number 3, constant conversation with directors of the programs and Spanish and Quechua teachers. Number 4, interaction with many students in non-university contexts such as concert, parties, and cultural events, among others. The program implements a sequence of Spanish language courses and another sequence of Quechua language courses within a variety of discipline courses like history, philosophy, or literature that are taught entirely in Spanish. The program of the study was also conducted using 4 types of dichotomies that the institution and the study reproduces in its pre-service teacher education program. So dichotomy number 1, the first language versus the second or foreign language. Many students feel frustrated because they do not fit in the bilingual idea that IBE official discourse imposes, and that is equivalent to having Quechua as L1 and Spanish as L2, or being coordinated bilinguals. Many feel delegitimized because they are represented as Spanish learners, and the institution question their competence in this language. Dichotomy number 2, context for Spanish use versus context for Quechua use. The courses are taught monolingually in the focal language, that is Spanish in the Spanish courses and Quechua in the Quechua courses. When students use Quechua in the Spanish courses, the teachers feel uncomfortable and call the students' attention. When they use Spanish in the Quechua courses, the teachers sanction it by saying that a virus has got into the classroom, as if the use of Spanish constitutes a betrayal of the indigenous language. Dichotomy number 3. Spanish text and literacy practices versus Quechua text and literacy practices. Quechua for Spanish-speaking people, but using strategies that could help them understand the language. Only by turning Quechua into an everyday language, we will guarantee its survival in public spaces, in academic ones, in everything. Dichotomy number 4, the Quechua linguistic system versus the Spanish linguistic system. The Quechua teachers from this program reproduce specific practices in Quechua influenced by 5 different language ideologies. Number 1, they conceive language more as structure and competence than as practice. Number 2, defend a discourse of language preservation oriented toward the past. Number 3, sustain a rigid and fixed connection between language, community, and place. Number 4, talk about Quechua as if students were monolinguals and not bilinguals who constantly develop translingual practices. And number 5, promote the separation of languages and other types of dichotomies such as L1, L2, local, global, authentic, non-authentic, that have been part of the discourse of IBE in Peru and other contexts. The findings. The analysis of this program has shown that its intercultural bilingual education model promotes dichotomies where languages are conceptualized as things and not as practice. The result also reveals a tension that has been developing in the last decades between traditional and post-traditional approaches to language policy and revitalization. This means that while the older generation of Quechua experts are trying to guarantee the linguistic human rights of the first language, Quechua speakers who mostly lived and have lived in rural areas, the younger Quechua counterparts are opting for a more innovative and creative route. They are trying to reverse the status of Quechua through the use of language in urban everyday life and by getting more people knowing, learning, and using it. This research study has a lot of strengths to be considered. Triangulation, data are collected from different sources. The results are reliable, and including excerpts from the interview in the article is a very good point. However, there is also a limitation. Regarding limitation, this study has no research questions that I think this make the reader confused and unclear. For critical insight, the aim of bilingual education is not to maintain everything in its place. Its aim is to develop language learning, but also to reconstruct the value of different languages involved and discuss who has the right to use them and in which circumstances, based on Heller 2011. Regarding implications, I have come up with 2 points to be considered. First, language classrooms should minimize social status, intercultural relationships, and inferiority to promote social interaction. Number 2, promote the concept of interacting to learn, not learning to interact. Sometimes students find it difficult to learn the language, since the opportunities are constrained by their social status, intercultural relationships, and inferiority. For example, girls or the poor are usually undervalued, so they cannot take part equally in social interaction. Moreover, these kinds of people often identify themselves as inferior and they are not confident enough to interact with other people. In this sense, by minimizing social status and intercultural relationships, the student can participate more in social practice, which leads to successful language learning. On the other hand, as Savigno 1991 said, language learning results from participation in communicative events. In addition, as a teacher, I always encourage my students to interact with each other both inside and outside the classroom. In other words, to succeed in language learning, the student should interact to learn and not learn to interact. So these are the critical questions. Thank you for watching.